Hello everybody, this is Chris Schmidt from RKT Lasso, and thank you so much for purchasing, or at least checking out, the new Field Driver. I'm going to be assuming that you've picked up the Field Driver bundle for the purposes of these videos, and that you've already got everything installed. Now, the Field Driver bundle includes the Field Driver Tag and the RKT Lasso Field Pack 1, because hopefully in the future we make more. Now, in order to add a tag into your scene, the very first thing you need to do, which is important, is you find it by right-clicking and going to Extensions. And there you'll find your Field Driver Tag. You don't find it by clicking the Extensions dropdown. You will see a Field Driver, but these are the fields that we made, not the tag. So just keep that in mind. It's a mistake I make sometimes when I'm trying to find some sort of tag plugin. You have to right-click to find it on an object. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and create our very first Field Driver by right-clicking on an object, Extensions, and clicking RKT Field Driver. The instant I create that, you're going to see a couple different things happen. First of all, we've got a new tag, and the tag has a question mark on it because it doesn't know what it's driving yet. Next up, it created a RKT Timer. That's one of our new fields. And then you'll see that we got this nice little widget in the left part of our viewport. Now, inside of the tag itself, you're going to see a couple different things. First of all, you'll see the quick link. And what this is going to enable you to do is automatically and very quickly link to the position, rotation, or color, the three most common things I think you might be driving. At least they're the most universal with all the different objects. So in this case, if I click position, immediately we'd create a tag, we said link to position, and now something moved. If I hit play in my timeline, we now have automatic animation. So now inside of the Field Driver tag, you're going to see a couple different things. You now see that we are linked to this null, and we are driving the position. We've got this checkbox. We can turn that on and off to activate this particular parameter. And we've got an unlink button, so I can unlink that, and now we're not driving anything. And we can relink to our position, and now it's moving again. We did that so that you're able to get some animation happening right away in your viewport, and that's being driven via our timer. So right now, this timer is essentially, we'll talk about this in its own dedicated video, but essentially, it is just outputting 0 to 100% over the time of 0 to 30 frames, or whatever your current frames per second is. In our tag, you'll see that we have a minimum value and a maximum value, and it's a vector because we're controlling the position. So why don't we switch this to being 0, 0 on X, and now on Y, I'll say I want to go up to 200. So now, what we're essentially saying is we are outputting inside the field list values from 0 to 100%. Hopefully you're a little bit familiar with fields, but if you're not, this is actually a really good way of learning it because a whole tool is built around them. So the timer is outputting from 0 to 100%, and those values are getting mapped from 0 being the min and 100% being the max. So we're automatically transitioning between those two things. Now, moving on, we have our actual values here, our min and our max. But it doesn't have to be limited to this. We could say unlink, and let's do rotation instead. And now we've got a max of 90 degrees and a min of 22.5. That happens because when you link to a value, it's going to take the current value and then return that as the max, and then take 1/4 of that and return it as the min, typically. So now you can see a little bit of rotation happening. So that's pretty fun. Now we could change this to be a different value, let's say up to 360 and starting at 0. And now that's going to start spinning around. And because our timer, which again has its own dedicated video, is set to loop mode, you see it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning forever. So really powerful there. But there's a lot more that we can do here. So in order to show that off, I think we should switch this from being a timer to being a RKT Noise. So I will delete that and instead go to our fields here. And if I click on this, you're going to see that we've got all of our regular cinema fields and 3 new RKT Lasso ones. Now, we will talk about these, and all of these do work, but let's immediately jump to this RKT Noise. And now you're going to see that it's wiggling around a little bit randomly, and it's because it's now based on a noise. Now, our noise, let me delete the timer. Our noise is sort of a simplified version of the Cinema 4D random field, but it does some slightly different things that I really like, and it simplifies it and works really, really well with a Field Driver. So a couple different things. First of all, let's have this affect more than just the Y. So let's click on R for rotation, because that's what we're driving right now. And let's say that I want to copy this around. I want this to be able to rotate all over the place. So what we could do is type out the number like 360 again and again, or we could select the number and copy it and paste it. But instead, let's type in a number like 90, and I'm going to click this little button right here and say copy it down. So if I click on this button when it's a vector, that's going to copy it down. And now we have 90, 90, 90. I was able to copy that automatically. Now we've also got these other buttons. This one is copy to the left. So if I do that, it's going to be 90 everywhere. And if it's all the same value, nothing's happening. But more fun than that is this mirror button. If I click mirror, it's going to take the value from the right and mirror it to the left side. So now we've got negative 90 to positive 90. So super handy for being able to quickly change your values. So in this case, I could say, well, let's go back up to 360. And then mirror it to the left, and then copy the top value to the other ones. So with 2 quick clicks, I was able to get those values spread through the entire 2 vectors. So now you can see we've got a random field, this random noise, one of ours, and we've got its own setting. So I could slow it way down. I can say, hey, go way slower. We can speed it up. This is unclamped, so we can keep going higher and higher, and that's going super crazy fast. And then we've got our bias slider. Now, if you're familiar with C4D Noises, it's kind of like this grayscale cloud of noise. And typically, those noises are very gray. They hang out in the middle range, halfway between black and white. And you'll actually see those 3 values represented in our little widget over here. We've got a vector going, of course, in our tag. And now you can see we've got X, Y, and Z represented. And they're kind of drifting up and down. So that's 0%. And this one is 100%. We've got our 3 values drifting around. If I grab the noise, I can start increasing the contrast with our very lovely custom bias slider. So it's kind of like contrast, but it's kind of like smooth. So if I increase this, I can start increasing the contrast, and you'll start seeing these dots going from hanging out near the middle. And as I go higher and higher, you're going to see they want to hang out near the extreme. So I can push that really far, and now you can see it very much up near the top, up near the bottom. So for my money, and you can see it does these really cool spins at these extreme angles. But for my money, you set bias to 25%, and that will make it so the noises don't just hang out in the middle anymore. They're more likely to reach their extreme, but not go too much further past it. So you really get the full range of your noise. So full range of noise, but maybe slow it down a little bit. And yeah, look at that lovely random animation on top of everything. So very powerful. Now that is just a very simple driving of the min to the max. And this can apply to any parameter. So right now we're driving rotation. But let's say I want to drive something else. Well, one thing you do is say unlink, and now nothing's being driven. So what do we want to drive? Well, we've got our quick link. We can try something different like position. And now by default, you see these values weren't too extreme. So let me type in maybe 222 up here, copy it down, and mirror it to the left. And now we are driving the position. So lovely. That's now wiggling around. We're getting the full extreme. You see these values are just barely getting to the edge. It's moving around really nicely. We're going to increase the speed of our randoms. Let that wiggle around a little bit more. So that's working great. Now, you could push that even further, even with our quick link, and I'll show this on a new custom object. Why don't we just make a cube, anything nice and simple. So I got this cube here. Right click, I'll add a brand new extensions, field driver. And this time, you see I've got the timer, but this time I'm going to say I want to drive color. So now you'll see that my color is animating. And there's a couple different modes here that are pretty handy. Let me hide that logo for now. First thing to notice is it's in color mode. It's a timer looping from 0 to 100% over 30 frames. So it's just going to loop and loop and loop. One thing you'll notice is our widget now is just changing to match the color of the object. I love this widget. We only added this in like the last 4 days. So super crazy to add that in super last second. But we can customize these colors. I can say, hey, transition from black to blue. So transitioning there. Let's change this over and we can set it to another nice random color here. So now we can go from yellow to blue. There we go. Lovely colors. So we're transitioning between those two. That's using a gradient. Now, again, we could copy the color from one side to the other. So we can make both of them blue. I can change this to pink if I want to. But what's really fun here is you can mirror the value. So I can say, okay, I want kind of this crazy orangey color. And I can say mirror it. And now you get the opposite color. And we can change that color to, let's say, pink. And let's see what the opposite of pink is. The opposite of pink is this very light green. So really fun to mirror those. But even more powerful is changing this to something like gradient. I love gradient mode. So we can drive colors on anything, any color, anywhere, any parameter in cinema that can be using color. We can drive it with a gradient. So, nice simple gradient here, which is nice because we can do things like, like increase the contrast of that a little bit. So now it's transitioning between those. But we can click load preset, load in something like full colors here. And now you can see we're actually traveling through this entire thing. It's actually going from 0% all the way up to 100%. So we're cycling all the way through. Now you see we've got this really long timeline right now. So if I grab my timer, I could increase my end time to something else, but I've got this handy button in the middle, which just means match timeline. So I click on that, and now we're 0 to 999. And now you can see that very slowly over the timeline, it's going to be transitioning through all of these colors. So again, your little feedback there is going to be telling you exactly the color, and we slowly travel through those. Now, this is using a timer, but we can also do this via fields. So I'm going to turn this to field mode, and let's not use a timer. I'll delete the timer, and this time I will create a noise. So this noise is outputting noise, color and the value. I don't need value. Now, inside of any field inside of Cinema, you can be outputting color, but in this case, I'm going to say I want to do a color remap, and I want to remap it as a gradient, and we'll load in another kind of crazy gradient. I'll scroll down to some of my custom ones and grab neon. So now I got these neon colors randomly traveling around. So now we just never quite know what color we're going to get. We got just this noise. I can crank this up a little bit to make sure we get the extreme values. And then you see we get almost the full range. We can speed this way up, and now you can see we get these flashing lights. Let's go easy on that, just in case there's an epilepsy warning there. So yeah, slowly transition through the colors. So there's 3 different ways of using just color by driving it directly by transitioning with this color, or a gradient, or using fields. So very powerful. Keep in mind, we haven't gotten into it yet, but in your field list, you can layer up field after field after field, and that would be driving this color. So very powerful there. Now, up until this point, we've only been driving, kind of these vectors here. If I unlink, we've just been driving position, rotation, and color. But the best part about Field Driver is we can be driving anything. So let's go into my cube, and this time I want to drive the Y parameter. So I click directly on the Y parameter, and I can drag it directly over my field driver tag. And you'll see I get this little drop down icon. So any parameter, anything that can be keyframed in Cinema, we should be able to drag onto this tag, and I can drop it. And you see the letter changes to Y. The value has changed. And now if I click on the tag, you're going to see that we get these values. And again, the maximum is the current value it was, and then 1/4 of it. Now, in this case, I'm going to mirror the value, and check this out. If I say mirror, it's going to go to 0 because the Y parameter can only go down to 0. So this actually adapted the min and the max from the parameter. So yeah, that went down to 0, and now we've got the noise. And now if I hit play, you'll see it's not a vector. So we only get a single white circle on the feedback, and now you see the noise is driving just the Y position. Now we can shift this to any property we want. We can say, hey, instead it'll be X. I can drop that on, and now X is the one that's animating. We can grab the segments Y. I'll drag that on, and now our segment Y is going to be changing. Let's go into the tag and make sure we're going from 1 to, let's say, 22. And now over time, or via this noise, you can see that the count is going to be increasing or decreasing. We can be driving any parameter that we want to be on anything. So very, very, very powerful from there. So let's unlink that. And of course, you can drop any parameter on there you want. But what I'd love to do right now is show you some of the super duper special power inside of this tool. So let's go back to this driving color, and let's have that be a field again, because we're getting lovely colors from here. Let's say that this cube is back to its default size for now and back to its default segments. So I want to drive multiple parameters, I'm thinking. I want to drive the size and the color. So let's go onto the cube. And right now we're driving color. So what do we got to do? Make another tag? No. With Field Driver, I can click on the cube, grab the size. When you grab the vector here, so the word size, hold down Shift. Make sure you hold down Shift. And now I can drag that on top of my tag, which right now is C for color. And then when I drop it on, you see it changes to a hashtag. When I click on the tag, you're now going to see that we have both the color right here, we're driving color, and we're driving the size. We're actually able to drive multiple parameters with one tag. So once again, let's zero those out so they get nice and tiny. Actually, we'll get too small. So let's just say 55, copy down. So now if I hit play, we've got the color changing and the size changing. Let's grab our noise and say it's going to go a little bit faster. Let's crank that up even more. So yeah, now that's wiggling around, doing all these crazy colors. Maybe not too fast, wiggling around. And now let's add in more parameters. Let's grab the coordinates, and I'm going to say I want to affect the position. Hold down Shift, copy it on there as well. And now it's moving around. Now keep in mind, it's being fed the same values, but here's the position. So I'm going to say, okay, copy the 200 and mirror it over. And now you can see that as it scales and wiggles, it's changing multiple ones at the same time. Let's go and add more. Let's grab our cube and say, I want to add on the rotation as well. Holding down Shift, I can add that on. So now we've got this rotation down here. it's going to be the last parameter. Let's copy that down, mirror it over. And now you can see that we are driving all of these things at the same time. So incredibly powerful that we can layer all this up on a single tag. And right now with a single noise. Now, of course, we got all the power of the fields. We can add more than one if we want to. But let's see. Let's go and check out the ability for us to add additional tabs. And that's going to be pretty important when it comes to these multiple objects as well. But for now, you know what? I think I might want to clean this up a little bit. Now that we do have multiple tabs, a couple things to keep in mind. Now we can unlink individual properties. We can turn on and off individual properties. So like, well, here's the size. If we turn it off, it's returning nothing on that. We can turn off position, and now position goes back to the default of 0. So we can do that. And also we can say rearrange these. I can say, okay, position, I want you to be up 1 and I want you to be up another one. So now that's at the top. An important thing to note is our feedback here. It's only ever giving feedback on the topmost parameter. So now you see it's giving us feedback on the position. But if I want to see color, I can put that on the top of the list. And now it's color feedback that we're getting. Just keep that in mind. Actually, while we're on the topic of this feedback, something I want to show you that's pretty cool. Let's rearrange it so you see the position. I love seeing these 3 vectors. Again, this only got added like 4 days ago. But if you double click on your field driver tag, it's going to hide that feedback. Double click again, it will bring it back. So very easy to see the feedback or get rid of it. You'll see later that we can control that manually, but the double clicking there, very, very powerful. While we're on the topic of double clicking, of course, double clicking hides it and unhides it. But if you hold down Shift and I double click, it just turns off the tag. All it just did was turned off the enable button. So holding down Shift can activate and deactivate your field driver tag. So both those very powerful. And I love being able to turn those on and off. This one's getting a little bit messy just because we link so many different things. So let's start talking about multiple tabs just by making a new one. So actually, let's go back to our field driver logo here. Just delete everything, reset, transform. There we go. It's in the middle, hanging out, ready to go. So let's right click on that and add on a extensions field driver tag. With this tag, what do we want to drive? Well, let's just go to field driver and say I want to drive the position. So excellent. We got the position getting driven. It's a timer. Let's delete the timer and instead add in a noise. And we don't need that timer there. And let's do the regular stuff with the timer. Let's speed it up a little bit. Let's add in a little bit of that contrast that I love. And inside of our main tag, let's make sure that we're driving these properties. So let's copy these around. So now, yeah, lots of positional movement, kind of wiggling all over the place. Now we can make additional tabs. Clicking on new tab, we can click on this button right here that says make a new tab, and it makes a new tab for us. So what I'm thinking is, actually, even before we do this, let me show you something. If we go into the main tab, we can start layering up multiple fields. Of course we can. So I can say, okay, let's add in another noise. So we'll make a second noise here. And I just call this one noise medium. So on the second noise, let's make sure, yeah, it's already here and it's set to max. Now you start getting the layers adding on top of each other. So I can say normal, and now this new one is completely overriding it. If I could say set it to subtract, and now it's subtracting from the one underneath it. If you're familiar with fields, this should all be pretty familiar. If you're not, think of it like Photoshop, how the different layers can, layer up on top of each other. But personally, the one that's most clean to me is just leaving it on normal. So on this medium one, I want to speed it way up. So I'm going to go inside that noise, and we're going to set this up to like 1,000. So you see we get all this crazy jitter going really, really fast. So now inside this layer, you can see that, okay, we got this really fast one. If I turn it off, we've got the bigger, slower one. So what I'd like to do is leave this on. Actually, we didn't turn up the contrast, so I should do that as well, just so that everything's all synced up. So add the contrast, and you see it's wiggling around really fast all over the place. Back into our tag, we could just start pulling down the opacity. So I can say, actually, I only want to see, in this case, like 10%-ish of that kind of fast noise, this fast noise wiggling around really, really quick. We still have the big movements from one noise and the slower movements from the other one. So we can just layer them up on top of each other. Totally an option. I love being able to do that. But an alternative thing that you could do is let's delete out this noise here. It still exists. And now move into a new tab. So I click new tab. And what do I want to do with this new tab? Well, in this new tab, it's got all the same parameters that we saw before. So now I'm going to say, hey, I want to link to that faster noise, this medium noise. You see it's wiggling around all over the place. So what this is now doing is this tab, every tab is additive to the previous one. So we got this base tab, which is this big, slow movement. So now in the second one, I'm going to say, okay, but this one, I want to go 22 and copy down and mirror. So we're going negative 22, positive 22 with a faster noise. And now it's very similar to what we had over here where they were kind of like fading via their opacity on top of it. But now I can say, hey, this one, I want to be very precise, 200 to minus 200. And over here, I'm going to say now it's going 22 to minus 22 with a faster noise. So instead of making the opacity change, which we could still do, we can still pull down that opacity, but they're now in separate tabs and we keep everything a little bit cleaner, a little more organized. Now, secondary tabs have a lot of options, very similar to what we had. I can still turn off that property. In new tabs, that's separate. I can just turn off every one of those individually. So essentially, I just turned off this tab. We can also grab the strength and pull that way down. It's also similar to turning it off, but we can increase it and you can go beyond 100%. So I can make this really powerful. And now the jitter is going super crazy. Let's pull it back on that. We've also got the delete tab. I can click on that. It'll just delete that tab away. If we bring it back, it'll remember the properties. We just have to relink the fields into it. And lastly, we have this tab name. So we can rename the tab to medium. I'll just say medium. And now my tab changes its name, which is super handy. And now just to complete this, let's say that I'm going to duplicate this noise. And let's say that this one is going to be our small noise. And what I'm thinking is in this main tab here, we still got the medium. So we'll grab medium and say, okay, cool. You slow down a little bit. You can be like around 300. So we got medium noise, and the medium noise is going to move a medium distance of about 77 to minus 77. And then we'll make another new tab. This one will be super manic. So that'll be the 22, nice and small. Copy down, mirror, and we'll link to that small noise. And the small noise still has all of that jitter. So now all of those are adding together. All of them here, you can see all the properties are getting added, driver 3, which here, let's just call that one like jiggle. So that's like our little jiggle layer on top of it. So that gets added to medium, which gets added to the field driver tab, and they're all added together. Our feedback is also representing this. If we were to say turn off both of these tabs, you can see that we just had that nice smooth movement. But now we add in the medium, and now we get these little secondary movements, and you can see that it can shoot beyond 0 and it can shoot above 100 because they are getting added together. Now we can go into jiggle, crank that one back up again, and now you see you get this tiny little jitter on those as well. So you get the big movements, the medium movements, and the small movements all layered up, all on a single tag and driving that property. But of course, these add together in kind of like every way. So we could also go back in here and say, I also want to be driving my rotation. So let's grab R for rotation, hold down Shift, and add it to position, change it to hashtag, because again, multiple parameters. And now we can say, okay, in the base tab, that's super slow. I want that to be 360. Copy down, mirror. Go into the medium tab, and here's the rotation on that one. And that one I want to be a lot less, so I'll say 33. Copy down and over. And then on our jitter, I'm going to slow that one down even further, and I'll say that one's going to be only, let's say 3. Copy down and over. And now the exact same thing, we got all this crazy rotation happening on now we got 3 different layers and 2 different properties. So you can just layer and layer and layer these things on top of each other. And that's where so much of the power comes in. Okay, excellent. Moving on, I think we just covered all of the basics in the main tag. Why don't we clean this up? Just simplify, delete everything, reset transform, right click, add on a fresh field driver. And let's just drive the position so there's something. So we've now seen the way that looks when we add multiple tabs and we hold down Shift and add multiple parameters to it. Now we got our field list. You can add on all these different fields. We've got, actually, we should talk about these other fields. We can use any of the max on field objects. We got our new ones from RKT Lasso. You use any of these field layers. It's not uncommon for me let me delete this timer. It's not uncommon for me to add in like a solid, and a solid is a great one because this just sends out a constant value. So now I could just grab the slider and that's now just like 0%, 200%. So it's kind of like I can set a baseline. I can say I want to start at 50% power, and you'll see that, our line right here, for X, and that's because that's the value that's actually changed. If we put all these in, you'll see all of them are dead center. So value is super nice there. But let's go and reset these. You can always just right click on the arrow and that resets everything to their default value, which is going to be 0. And in this case, let's pause this because it doesn't need to animate. Let's make a linear field. And a linear field is going to be handy. Let's make a linear field from here. And you'll see that, again, everything with field driver is all about the transition from 0% to 100%. And we're mapping those values a lot like a range mapper. And everybody knows, if you watch my old tutorials, I love the range mapper inside of Espresso. So with this linear field, I can grab it and move it on X here. And you'll see as I move it that I'm changing the value from 100% to 0%. Now, interestingly, because when it's created, it's a child of the field driver, or the object that field driver is on. It's actually moving up and down with it, which is kind of funny. It still works, but it moves up and down. So I would suggest, if you're using these positional-based fields, you pull it out from the object. So now it's out of the object, and now I'm free to slide it in and slide it out, up and down, just based on this field passing through. So that's pretty handy right there. Now let's collapse this down, and I think I will make a nice copy of it. So hold down, actually, I'll just grab this arrow, hold down Control. Actually, right now we're overriding the position. We've taken control over position. So instead of driving position, I want to just drive the Y position. So let's go to Y, drag it over, and replace the position to just that. And it's still going, actually, it reset it to the values we dragged in. So now it's 0 to 200. So actually, let's change that to positive 200. I think that would be better. So let's duplicate our field driver logo. I'll make a copy of it and drag it over. And I can also just drag the arrow, hold down Control, and that will make a duplicate as well. So we got 3 different field drivers. So if I were to grab this field layer, I can just drag this across. And as it passes through each one of them, each one will independently go up because it's based on the axis of the object. And you actually see, because I have 3 tags selected, we're actually getting the feedback from all 3 of them. So you can see 3 different white dots go up, 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 down, down, down. So yeah, that's using a linear field. So that's great. We can increase that way bigger, which means it's going to be a slower transition, and they'll all kind of be in there at the same time. So that's pretty fun. Just using fields, so many different things you can do. But this is going to start leading us into the idea of moving into our advanced tab, because we've pretty much covered everything inside here. The only thing I didn't mention is at the very bottom, you have a question mark button, and that will jump you to the field driver help page. So let's change this field driver to a circle, or rather a spherical field, and I'll make that way bigger. And I want to show you something that's maybe a little bit, let me show you a problem and show you how you get around it. So if I were to grab this field and start passing it through, you're going to see that we're going to get some, actually it's being incredibly stable. Let me see if I can make it, actually it'll probably get worse if I make it small. That's what I want. Yeah. So now you see, now that's small, you'll see something weird. You see how it's like jittering all over the place? Well, there's a good reason for that. Delete and delete. Okay. So as I pass this through, it's suddenly jittering up and down. Why is it doing that? Well, it's doing that because it is sampling the axis of the object, but we're also moving the axis of the object. So as this passes through, it says, oh, I move up. But as it moves up, it moves out of the field, which means it's out of the field, which means it has a lower value, which means it wants to move down. So it's a feedback loop. So it's kind of logical that would happen, but it's pretty easy to get around that. And we get around that by moving into some of the first properties inside the advanced tab. We'll ignore piggyback for now, and we'll just go down to sample. So we are sampling. What are we sampling? We're sampling the axis of the object. And because that axis is moving, these positional fields don't work too well on it. So we've got alternatives to that. I could say, actually, I would like to sample the world position. And that just means 0, 0, 0 in the world. So I'll just make a little sphere, and you will see that indeed that is where the world 0 is. We could move this out of the way just to super prove it to you. So now you can see right there, that's world 0. And now if I pass the spherical field through our object, you see nothing happens because we set it to world mode. So now as we pass it through the world 0, now the object moves and it's not jittering up and down. So that's a way of preventing that feedback loop. And potentially even better is, instead of linking to the world, we can link to we can link to an object. And in this case, I can link to the sphere. So now no matter where I put the sphere, and let's grab the sphere and say, move it way up here. Now I could pass the spherical field anywhere I want to, nothing happens. But when I start passing through the axis of the sphere, that's when it starts getting applied. So keep in mind, anything outside the spherical field is 0%, and the dead center is 100%. So as I move this through, you can see that I'm right at 100%, so it's full power, and then it starts fading back out again. Every field has its own unique fall off, but that's just showing how to use the positional ones. Inside the tag, in axis, link, or world mode, we have this offset, and that's just going to take like the set offset and say, oh, but it's going to be offset on X or Y or Z. So kind of virtually, you can imagine the axis moving off where it currently is. I expect 90% of the time, people aren't going to be worried about the sampling, but it's nice that these options are here, and that's how you can get away from that feedback loop. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So let's continue in the world of our advanced tab. Let's go and set this up to be, actually, oh yeah, here's a good way of doing this. Let's delete our tag. Actually, I don't want to delete it yet because I want to show you the next property. So delete the spherical field, delete the sphere. Currently, we're driving Y. Now, you've probably noticed, in fact, let's do it. If I right click on an object and say, create a new field driver, it automatically creates a field. It automatically creates a RKT timer, which of course is this timer field that will have its own dedicated video. So that always gets created. But you got a couple options here. Instead of creating the timer and the tag, you can right click and hold down Alt for alternative functionality. And you can go to extensions and click field driver. And instead of creating a RKT timer, it creates a RKT noise, and we've been using that noise a whole bunch. So holding down Alt will create the opposite field. So we got timer and we got our noise, and it's just great that you can automatically create which one you want. But there are additional alternatives. We can go inside the timer, and under advanced, under global, we can set a different default field. So in this case, it's always going to be creating a timer when you create a new tag, but instead we can say create a noise. So if I turn that on, forever in the scene file and in this version of Cinema, it's going to remember that for you. So if I right click and I say create a field driver, now it made a noise by default. And then just for completion's sake, now that it's defaulting to always making a noise for you, if I right click and hold down Alt as I create it, it'll do the opposite, and it made a timer for me. Now, the last option in there is you can set it to none. If you don't want it making one for you at default, you can say none, and it will just remember that. And every time we make a brand new field driver tag, it is going to not make one. So now it's essentially trusting you to say, what do you want to drive and what fields do you want to use? But for me, it's kind of important, especially for new users, that when you make something, it kind of does something for you automatically. And having some sort of field that does something felt really important. Now, for consistency, I'm going to set my default field back to timer so we can continue. I suppose let's make I'm going to hold down Alt as I make a new field driver. And this time, let's drive our position. So we got position. Let's go back to like 200 and copy down and mirror. So now under advanced, let's take a look at our viewport feedback. So you already see that we have this lovely feedback gizmo. Now, this checkbox is what turns it on and off. And that is when you double click the icon, what is turning on and off. So we can turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. And that should be universal. If you have it off and I make a new tag, that new tag will also be off. So if you never want to see it, you can turn it off and it'll just never show up for you. But double clicking and bringing it back, super handy. And then we've got some different settings for you for your placement. So we can set it anywhere left and right. We set it anywhere vertically. So you can be all the way at the bottom to be less intrusive, perhaps. And then we've got our scale. So you make it super huge to take up the whole thing. Or you can say, oh, I want feedback, but I want it to be really tiny. So you can just be like really tiny down there. And if I play, you can see it's still animating and it's still updating there. So you can just right click on these and go back to the defaults. And you can also grab the color and say, you don't want that to be yellow. You want it to be some other color. And if you change the color, it's fine. If you start driving our color here, so if I unlink and say color instead, this is still going to update to be animating whatever color that would be driving. Of course, this null, this color null is animating, but you just don't see that in the viewport. But yeah, you can change that custom one to anything that you like. Okay, excellent. So that covers all of these global settings. Well, at the bottom, we've got outputs, and this is actually outputting the vector. Essentially, it's the values you would see here. Let's go back to unlink and to position just so we can see it. And I'll go back to 222, copy down, copy left, or mirror left. So down here, you see we've got these values going out. And essentially, these values are representing X, Y, and Z, or red, green, and blue. And those are representing these three from 0 to 100%. Of course, they could go negative, and they could go above 100% or above 1. That is outputting those values for you. And then there's also the output color. And this is very important for the RKT Field Driver link field, which we'll be talking about in its own dedicated video. But that's also going to be important now that we're going to talk about baking. Right now, this is a really long timeline, so I'm going to drop it down to 99 so we don't have to wait too long. So if you are sending this out to a render farm, or if you're sending it to a coworker who doesn't have Field Driver, but you should totally recommend it to them, or if you're doing an animation and maybe there's motion blur and you want to just make sure that everything's going to be perfectly matching what you're seeing in your viewport, you can bake these down. So under advanced, we got these 4 different baking buttons. The first one is just bake current to keyframes. So if I click on that, it's going to run through. And if I click on our field driver, you'll see on my position, which is what we're using, is now baked every single keyframe down. So if I hit play, exact same animation, but now field driver is all grayed out. You see all these tabs grayed out until we hit clear keyframes, and that's going to clear out all of your keyframes. So now you see there's no keyframes on that anymore. Now keep in mind, if you did already have some keyframes on there, that will just override them. So for the most part, field driver isn't affecting things that are already keyframe, but keep that in mind. It will override them. And then moving on inside of advanced. So yeah, that was bake current to keyframes. There's also bake all to keyframes. So if we had more than one, it would bake all of them. I suppose we could do that. Right now, I am driving the position, so I'll make a copy, but I'll put that into a null just so it's easy for me to move it to a new location. So yeah, now we're driving 2 different ones. So I could click 1 and then bake just that one, or we can actually select 2. And if you say bake current to keyframes, it'll actually bake both of them. And actually something that's very nice is if I click that, it's only going to run this progress bar once. We actually had to do a bunch of work to make that happen because it was doing the progress bar once for every single tag, and now they all run at the same time. So that's pretty handy. I can click clear keyframes. It's only going to be on the selected ones. And of course, there is bake all. It'll just do all of them in the scene. And then you can also say clear all. It'll clear all in the scene. So yeah, pretty simple, straightforward baking of this object down into keyframes. So that's all cleared out. Everything's running just fine. And the last thing that we have to talk about on this tool is the piggyback. Now, there's going to be a lot more tutorials, and I especially recommend checking out the quick start where I'm going to kind of whip through a lot of these important settings. This video is more like the mechanical, like we're really stepping through and just being like, what does this button do? What does this button do? Where the quick start's more like, hey, let's do practical projects. And I'll even talk about some of the demo files that are included. And then I definitely recommend checking out the other videos where we will be walking through the different fields, like the field driver field and the noise and the timer. And we'll also be walking through the rocket hue, saturation, and brightness, stop motion, and weight tags, which are very powerful. I can't wait to show this off. But the very final thing to talk about is going to be this piggyback feature. So right now, everything we're doing is just like overriding whatever's happening. Let's simplify this. Delete, 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 and just reset the transform. So, okay, our logo is back in the center doing its own thing. What I'd like to do, I think, is we've got a camera here. I'll yank that out. So this camera, let's add in some keyframes. Let's animate that. So I'm going to say at the time of 0, I want the position and rotation to be, let's say, zoomed out here a little bit. Keyframe that. And now we'll go to the very end. And at the end, I want to have zoomed way up on this object. So we'll keyframe that. Okay, cool. I mean, super duper straightforward cinema stuff. I hit play, and now that's animated in. So now let's say, okay, now cool, that camera's moving. I want to add some wiggle to that. I want that to be jittering around. I'll dealing for the camera just so we can actually see the camera. Let me go to an angle that isn't getting too blown out on us. So yeah, now we got that camera moving. So now, okay, that's the position and potentially rotation that we want to control. So I'm going to right click and add a field driver tag. I'll hold down Alt so I get a noise in there. And what do we want to drive? I want to drive position. So, okay, we got position, but that's just kind of wiggling around there. It's not moving anymore. Why is that? Well, let's get the noise I want. I think maybe like 33. Copy down, mirror, and now it's like, okay, now it's back at 0. Why is it hanging out over here? It's just kind of wiggling around in that spot. Well, I want to make sure we can see this super clearly. So I'm going to grab the noise, and let's make it a little bit faster, and let's grab the bias and crank it up. So that's actually wiggling a little bit more blatantly. Actually, yeah, can't go too fast on here. There, super fast jitter. But it's just jittering there. It's not acknowledging the keyframes. And that's because this tag is just overriding whatever it's on. Now, that's behaving exactly like other Cinema 4D tags, and we will use it, but just like the constraint tag. So under rigging, there is the constraint tag, which you can use to drive like a springiness effect or like take over the PSR with a transform. Just like that, it's just overriding what comes in. But that is where piggyback comes in. If you go into the advanced tab on our tag, we can say, actually, I'd like to be piggybacking off of some other motion. So if I turn that on, now you'll see that our camera is animating and it's wiggling on top of it. So that's zooming along, actually working pretty much perfectly. And that is piggybacking. Now, it's important to note that you do want something driving that, because if there were no keyframes, this becomes a feedback loop. What's happening is it's saying, I'm at a new frame. What is the value if there was no field driver? Okay, cool. Now add on what field driver is doing. But if there's nothing underneath it adding onto it, then it's like, oh, what is the current value? 0. Okay, add field driver. The next frame, what is the current value? Whatever field driver told it to be the previous frame. So that can create some chaos. In fact, let me show you what happens. So here it is just hanging out there. I'm going to grab my keyframes, and holding down Control and Shift, I can click and it's erased out the keyframes. So now there is no keyframe. So we're piggybacking off of nothing. So now if I were to hit play, you're going to see that the camera is wiggling. And it's just going to keep wiggling and wiggling and wiggling. And eventually, especially if we make our timeline really long, it's just going to keep on wiggling and just drift who knows where. So like under field driver, under advanced, you can see these values are changing like all over the place, drifting and adding on top of each other. Now, later on, I'll have a tutorial about making some cool animation using that. And then we'll talk about storing the values, because you can kind of like store, it's almost like you can set a 0, 0, 0. So every animation would reset. But an interesting thing right now is the noise is essentially additive on top of itself. So when it hits the end, it's just going to loop back and watch. It doesn't pop. It just continues animating right from where it was. So yeah, pretty weird and interesting. But that is piggyback, which is the last property to talk about inside of the field driver tag. So you've seen all the different things we have, hopefully relatively simple. You say what you want to drive, and then you say what fields are going to get you there. You type in the value, put in your fields. That's what it all comes down to. You get fancier by adding additional tabs, get fancier by layering up field after field after field. And you're going to be able to get really fancy once you start doing things like using our field driver link tag. So you can link one field driver onto all the other field drivers. So you get like a master one controlling all the others. And that's to say nothing about being able to add in all of our additional modifiers, like our stop motion. I love this one, and our hue, saturation, brightness. But all of those are going to have their own dedicated videos. Highly recommend you go check those out, and definitely watch the quick start. But I'm looking forward to the idea of adding additional fields in the future. Actually, I just realized there's a huge thing I didn't mention that's super important as far as the basics of this bundle. And that is that all these fields that we're not focused on yet, but they all work on any MoGraph objects. It's not just for field driver. So if I were to make a cloner and make a sphere, drop that inside of the sphere. Now we got a big old pile of a bunch of spheres. I could say, okay, make a plane effector, and now that's pushing all of them up into the air. Let's make there be a whole bunch more. So say like 22 by 22. And I'm going to say, okay, this field is pushing up and changing the colors. Under the field, I'll say, hey, give me a random noise. Hit play, and now our noise is driving that. We can go and modify the noise property. So I can say, okay, increase the bias. We can crank that way up, and they see they're traveling very quickly through the center and going to those extremes. We can crank up our speed, so they're super jittering all over the place. Go back to our plane effector and say, hey, how far should that be going? And just push it up. I mean, in a lot of ways, field driver is behaving a lot like this, where this is always assuming you want to go to 0. This enables us to set the maximum, but not a minimum. But now we can do it on any property. So yeah, all of our fields will work in this context as well on anything that can accept fields. We can delete that out and create that timer. And now you see the timer is just going to say, okay, do this loop, push it up, loop it again and again and again and again. Really excited for timer. There's a bunch of cool settings in here. Some of this stuff, like technically you could do it using like random field, and there's a time that you can use to remap, but I find those deeply unintuitive, and getting this very simple and visual and really easy to click and creating a bunch of cool additional functionality. Yeah, really excited. So definitely make sure you check out those other videos. But for now, that is going to wrap up this video. Thank you so much again for picking up the Field Driver bundle, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.